Hey, welcome to the Invisible Strength podcast. Today's guest is part of our expert series as we welcome Dr. Jessica Grove. She's a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in helping people with chronic illness and medical trauma. Today, she's going to shed light on the emotional weight of chronic illness, medical stress in the nervous system, as well as give us some practical tools and tips to help us better regulate and manage our symptoms. So without further ado, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. And Chris, as always, it's good seeing you.
Likewise, really excited to speak with you and of course to speak with Jessica. We're really excited about this.
Jessica, for listeners who are new to you, can you share about your background and what led you to specialize in health and medical psychology?
Absolutely. So, my background, obviously, like you just said, is health psychology, which just means I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. And I did a fellowship or postdoctoral fellowship at a health center where I was specifically trained to work with people with a wide range of presenting medical conditions. So, I've been in transplant clinics and neurology clinics, bariatric clinics, all of that. And then when I kind of left my fellowship, I was an embedded psychologist in an oncology unit at a local VA center, and then also neurology. So I feel like I've had a lot of range of experiences and a lot of people that I've worked with across the years. And really what kind of, I guess, sparked my interest in some of this is very common, right? Is kind of personal experience with my own health. Not in probably the way that I operate now, but at beginning of graduate school, I made a lot of lifestyle changes to get better and get in better health, fitness, all of that. And I just was so amazed at how much better emotionally that I had felt after that. And so it really kind of just sparked this question in my brain is like, wow, there's something to this mind body connection. And can I help people there? Can I help use psychology and psychological science to actually help people's physical and emotional functioning at the same time?
So thinking about that moment for you where you were, paying attention to, your patient population, and it made you really think about, my goodness, the emotional toll of chronic illness. So much attention is given to the physical symptoms, but not necessarily like how traumatic it is. Like I remember during my diagnosis journey, I was teaching at a middle school, and I remember telling my supervisor, I was like, I feel traumatized. Those are the words I use. So your experience with seeing just the emotional toll of this journey.
That's a big one. Yeah. So to be honest, I don't know that there's like been a particular moment or anything like that that has kind of been like eye opening for me. But I will say that it's just been kind of this deep realization over time about, man, there is so much going on emotionally for people with chronic illness. Like you said, right? It's not just dealing with the physical symptoms of what this chronic illness is giving you, but it's also the self advocacy, right? The trying to figure out what's going on, the stress of having to constantly explain what's happening to maybe another medical professional or even your spouse or your family, and then a part of you getting taken away in a lot of this of like you can't do the things that you used to do or enjoy doing. And so with that comes like that isolation and that feeling like you're just really disconnected from the world you used to be a part of and enjoy and love, and then now what does this mean for me with all of this going on? So that's really both a physical stress, right? It impacts the body with all the symptoms that are going on, but then there's so much the other side of that coin, which is that emotional load and that
Right.
mental load of constantly dealing with something that's very unpredictable too.
This is a loaded question, but what's your approach in helping people navigate these life altering conditions?
That is a very big question. I would say it's so hard to know specifically. I work with the person that's in front of me to kind of figure out what's been going on for them and how do we get that next step, right? It's not always about these life altering, life changing decisions or moments, but it's a kind of like what's next for you. What I find a lot of the time, right, is that it often goes back to a couple of key things. One is emotional work, right? The emotional processing of just everything that Chris said, right? The traumatization of having to deal with this over and over again. And what that does is often lead people to suppress, right? I have to just not deal with the emotional labor of this because I have to survive. I'm stuck in that survival mode. So a lot of that is making space for emotions that have not had a chance to surface or not had a place in someone's life. And that's a really hard thing. So that can take as long as it needs to take for people. And then making space for those emotions as they move forward too, right? Because it's not like, oh, I dealt with that and we're done. It's like it's going to come up again, right? So I think there's an emotional processing piece that I try to really start with people. But if they're not ready for that too, there's a lot of other things that can be addressed too. I find grief work to be a big piece of this too. I'm not living the life that I expected to live.
Right.
And there's a big piece of, okay, I have to just grieve that life that I wanted. And it looks different now. What does that mean for me? So there's a bit of existential work there too, and who someone is, that identity piece, each
Yeah.
person's process, where they're coming to, where they're starting with is so individual, but there does seem to be those key themes of emotional processing, identity work, and grief work that all come up.
That resonates with me so much, especially the emotional processing piece. There was a period of probably 10 years where I just ignored my lupus the best I possibly could. I mean, I took my medication, attended appointments, whatever, but I was determined that I was still going to live my life.
Right.
When I finally eventually had a mental breakdown because I simply could not handle it all. It was just a crazy situation. But it wasn't until I sat with that grief and really processed this condition and that I'm not going to be able to live the same life that I initially envisioned. That's a really big process to work through. When people aren't quite ready to do the work, how do you support them in their journey?
That's an excellent question. And I think that readiness to do the work often comes with relationship, right? So someone coming to a session with me for the first time may just not feel the trust and safety there that they need to kind of delve into all of that work. And that's okay. Right. We take that step by step. We take it time by time. But I think that we will ultimately have to get there to see that true progress. So I'll start in these other ways. A lot of times behavioral methods are a really good strategy to kind of get some buy-in or help with some of the maybe physical functioning piece of it. And what I mean by that is how do we set up really good structures and routines that help you live better with your chronic illness? We don't have to deal with the emotional piece right now, but can we talk about maybe what it looks like for you to get exercise, right? Because so often I see very high functioning people, almost perfectionistic. And they're like, well, if I exercise, I've got to push through, go all out or
That's
something
right.
like that. And as you guys know, right, that is recipe for flare ups and
Right.
recipe for hospitalization
Hmm.
sometimes. And so a lot of the behavioral methods of like, let's work on just the basics of how do we pace our body? How do we find the right rhythm for ourselves so that we're not laying on the couch all day, but we aren't also going all out and going into these like push crash cycles, as we call them. I'm pushing so hard, then I crash. So I would say that there's a good amount of behavioral work that we can do that doesn't have to tap into all that emotional work. But if we don't get to that emotional work, I think we're going to be a little bit stunted in the progress that we can see. Because as I, briefly just before I joined this call, we were talking about emotional functioning and physical functioning are really two sides of the same coin. So if we're just squashing, like you said, Karen, squashing all of that, it's going to come out at some point and it's going to affect our physical functioning as well.
I think about, we've been talking about the existential nature of this, and in many ways, it reminds me of, a device that has a lot of apps open. Like, I don't know if you've had the experience where you look at your phone, like the battery's drained because I had 30 apps running in the background. And I think that the sort of stress that we have in the chronic illness community is very similar to that, where, even when you're trying to rest, it may look like you're doing nothing, but you're thinking about all that's going on. So, for the benefit of the audience, could you please explain what medical stress is precisely and how it affects both the mind and the body?
But yes, what is medical stress? That's such a good question. And because I think it goes back to just what we were talking about before on this is not just the normal stresses of everyday life, right?
Right.
And you have all of those. People with chronic illness have all the
Exactly.
stressor of their social life, of their work life, all of those things. But now on top of that, you've got the added mental, exhaustion that comes from okay, do I have my medications planned out right? If I'm going on a trip, do I have every medical device? Do I know which restaurants that I can eat at that day?
Come on.
Yeah.
So it's all the normal stuff that you might find and encounter, and then it's an added layer of that stress of having to deal with that. And then, like I mentioned before, it's often self advocacy, not just with medical providers, but with your family and friends, and just almost asking them, like, take this seriously, right? Can you take this seriously? Not everyone has that. Like, some people have really good support systems that's not an issue ever. But a lot of times, it's invisible, right? You can't see it directly in front of you. And just as humans, we kind of are skeptical about things like that.
Right?
So it can be another stressor of social stress, and then also that other piece of that emotional functioning there. You asked how it affects kind of the mind and the body, right? So we know that stress in the medical community has always been familiar with how that affects it, how it affects the body, right? But this can really lead to an increase in those symptoms, right? So your anxiety, your stress levels are not causing your medical illness, but is emotional suppression or the added stress of having to deal with the social factors, is that maybe contributing to symptom flare ups? Or maybe even adding on to different types of symptoms that might not be related to your chronic illness. A lot of times, fatigue is one of those additional symptoms that people are navigating. Headaches, chronic headaches may not necessarily be directly related to that chronic illness, but it's now on top of that because I haven't had the space to de stress, to unwind, and to process what's been going on. So it's a bit of an overarching statement or view. But yeah, I kind of see that that's how medical stress can both affect the mind and the body at the same time.
Jessica, I want to dive into the de stressing piece because even for people who have, let's say, effectively kind of processed, I know it's always ongoing, but processed their condition, been through therapy in a good space mentally with it, but with the uncertainty of chronic illness and autoimmune conditions, there's always that chance that the other shoe could drop and you get a flare up or one-off symptoms here and there. How have you seen stress show up even when people are in a good space, but there's still the dynamics they have to cope with chronic illness?
Yeah, the unpredictability of it and maybe de-stressing is too vague of a term, right? We need to kind of talk about what that actually looks like in reality
Sure.
for someone who is living in a very unpredictable body, like you said. And I think that is the hardest part about chronic illness. You can do everything correctly and you're still going to have a flare up. You're still going to have this disease or whatever you're dealing with come up. And so I don't know that like there's this like particular or set way to de-stress, but I would say that this is kind of the emotional work. And when I say we're dealing with grief or we're dealing with anger or we're dealing with these, sadness generally of just what this is to live in this body, it's not just about like getting through those emotions, then like, okay, I'm good, right? It
Right.
doesn't work that, but it is like making space as they come up, right? And the more that we can actually just allow those emotions to be what they need to be, counterintuitively, they take up less space in our life, right? So if I can just be angry, like I just need to be angry about this. And I need to allow myself those moments that whenever they come up, right? But if I'm not allowing it to come, then it can never pass. And I also think that that helps with the de-stressing that we're talking about because it also opens us up to all the positive emotions that can come too. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I don't trust happiness, right? Or I don't trust hope because it feels like I'm scared to experience these positive emotions because it's going to be taken away or
Right.
something like that. And I get that. That is such a scary place to be. But that's where when we allow anger to be anger and hope to be hope and sadness to be sadness, but also peace to be peace, we're just allowing ourselves to kind of go through what we need to go through. And we get to feel all the positive things and all of the negative things. So it's just the realm of being a human being. And again, I'm going to go back to it's almost counterintuitive, but this de stresses the body, fighting to hold it all together anymore. We're not constantly worried about what other people are thinking about us or these other things. So it takes that load off on our body to some degree, right? There's other things that have to go into it, but that's a big piece of it, I think.
I think so much of what you're speaking about, Jessica, I've been doing therapy for 5 going on 6 years now, and so much of the strategies my therapist, has introduced to me has helped with exactly what you're talking about. But I know particularly, like, generationally and culturally, sometimes therapy can have particular taboos where people are like, "Oh, I don't wanna even go in therapy because of the stigmas that may be attached to me." But can you help us understand how therapy can help with symptoms? You know, thinking about, like, fatigue and sleep issues, even brain fog. How does therapy help as an intervention for those things?
Yes, excellent question. And I just saw that Dr. David Clark on here a few episodes ago, and so he gave a really good overview on some of these things, how we call them like neuroplastic symptoms, and this is symptoms that essentially are generated by our brain and our nervous system that are threat based, right? I am feeling afraid. And because of that, I want you to protect me, right? I'm protecting the body. And I need you to take this seriously. So our nervous system and our brain can actually turn up the knob on symptoms so that we can take it seriously, right? It's trying to protect us. And so when we do some of this emotional work, it actually sends a message of safety back to our brain. It's safe to experience fear. It's safe to experience anger. And that can actually, counterintuitively turn down that threat response and actually eliminate or alleviate some of those symptoms that you're experiencing or have experienced. A lot of the time, those additional symptoms, and I'm not talking about the symptoms you have no control over because of chronic illness,
Right.
but sometimes these other ones that do come along in addition to the chronic illness, those are the ones that really can be alleviated through a lot of both cognitive and kind of this when I say cognitive, I mean emotional and mindset work, and through like those behavioral methods of like, okay, I'm not going to push until I can't push any further. And I'm not going to pretend with my family and friends that everything's fine so that I don't look weak or I don't look
Come
broken.
on.
And so a lot of that is how we send messages back to our system to say it's okay to be where you're at. And then I don't feel as, our brain doesn't feel as groggy, right? It can actually focus on what it needs to, or our sleep gets a little bit better because we're just tired at the end of the day and we go to sleep. And so I know that I'm oversimplifying this, and this could be a much, much longer conversation, but I think it has to go back to what messages are we sending to ourselves and our nervous system? It's almost that lizard brain, right? It's not the purely logical, purely factual piece of us, but it's that survival mechanism that's trying to show up over and over again and keep us alive. And we want to say thank you. And here's how I can help support myself through this process.
Talked about making space for these difficult emotions, which makes so much sense to me. It's natural to want to run away from grief and fear, but by just acknowledging how you're feeling, it can turn down the temperature on that particular emotion. Out day to day, what tools or tips do you give to people to make space for those difficult emotions?
That's a great question. Yes. So practical daily things that people can do. I work a lot with mindfulness training, right? And not that this is the answer, the end all be all, but when we can unjudgmentally pay attention, even just for a few moments, to what's going on both physically and in our emotional state, it gives us a little bit more freedom to allow it to come. And then, like you said, also allow it to go. So I would say in like day to day stuff, and I do this myself too, right? I do daily check ins, right? Like, especially if
Sure.
I'm busy, and most people do this less when they're busy, but I think it's more important to do when you've got a lot of things on your plate. I, I will schedule in like 2-minute breaks just to say, okay, I'm going to sit. What am I feeling right now? What am I physically feeling? What am I emotionally feeling?
Right.
And maybe I love this too, the mind body connection is big. Where is that emotion sitting in my body? Where am I feeling it? Because it will come out, right? If I'm feeling stressed or feeling anxious about my next appointment or something, I notice I'm bracing a little bit, right? And so I got to drop that a little bit. Or I might feel it in my stomach where I'm feeling a little nauseous or butterflies or something like that. So, where am I feeling this emotion? Because the way that I am currently thinking and the way that I'm currently feeling is going to affect my physical body. And I want to be mindful of that connection so that I can help it too.
You know, one of the things I often find myself saying to myself and in coaching sessions, saying it to others is be kind to yourself. So, from your estimation, what does self compassion look like, especially on those hard health days where the only thing you can do is stay in your bed?
Oh my goodness. You're like reading my playbook right now. I'm such a big advocate for self compassion. It's so important, right? What does that look like? And I think we do mix up a lot of times self compassion and almost like self pity. I think that's the
Sure.
misconception that people get in there. And that's not that at all, right? It's just this idea of I'm a human being and I struggle sometimes with hard things, just like every other human being on this planet. And so can I offer myself a little bit of kindness like I would probably would my best friend or my child
Of
or
course.
something like that, right? Because we have such different rules for ourselves than we do with everybody else almost in our lives. This does show up and anecdotally, right? I work with so many high achievers. This shows up the most with people who are high achievers and likely perfectionistic, self critical. And so that kindness is really hard to extend to themselves,
Yes.
right? And it feels like they're coddling themselves. I've heard that term a lot. And I'm like, no, because you don't see it that way for anyone else except yourself. So on those hard days where it's hard to get out of bed and maybe your symptoms are in the biggest flare and you don't know what what comes next, right? What is coming next? I often just say, what words would you offer your child, your brother, your mother, someone very close to you in this moment? And can you turn that to yourself? And even if it's really hard to believe, really hard to buy into for this moment, can you just give yourself permission to just accept that for a couple moments? Accept that I'm trying really hard and this is a really hard day. And so much growth can come from that because our bodies and our minds don't really respond to self criticism very well. If you think about it, right, you can think about this in any other capacity, like a child, a dog. The more you berate it, the less it wants to do.
Of course.
And so I think if we just respond to ourselves with that same encouragement and that same kindness, we're going to see ourselves be able to do more and more over time rather than a lot of times less and less that we see with that self critical or self punishing self talk that we have got going on.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Longer term, as because these are chronic illnesses, what your experiences and success with your clients, is it regularly seeking out therapy and having a psychologist like yourself to help you work through these? And or have you seen people essentially graduate to a place where they have the tools that they need to effectively manage their nervous system? So I'm curious about what you've seen in your practice long term wise with people
Yeah.
working through this.
Yeah. That's an excellent question because there is this conception that you need to be in therapy forever or something like
Right.
that. And maybe that is the case for a lot of people, but I would actually say the opposite is true from my work and what I do with people. I'm not about making lifelong clients. I think once let me phrase this in the correct way. You need to take whatever time you need to take in therapy. So that if that is 10 sessions, excellent. Take that 10 sessions. If that is 30, 40, 50 sessions, that's okay as long as you're working towards something and you're actually making some of that progress. Because I do think there gets to be a point where if you're in therapy too long, we can kind of form a little bit of a dependence. And I don't want you to depend on me for using emotion regulation skills and things like that. So for me personally, I am a big believer in giving you the skills, working with you as long as you need to master those skills, and then graduating out of therapy once those things are accomplished. And I'm probably in process of wrapping up with a number of people right now who the chronic pain has completely gone away, right, because of some of the work that we've been doing. That's chronic pain, it's separate than chronic illness, but you've got the tools, right? You know, if that pain comes back, you know what to do, how to handle it. And sure, I'll definitely be there in the future if you need a re up session or we need to go back and revisit these things. But ultimately, I want you back in your life. I want you living your life, not necessarily depending on therapy to process these emotions that you might be experiencing. once you develop the ability to do that on your own.
Thinking about someone who's listening right now and feels overwhelmed by, all that's going on, because I love that you mentioned that it's not as if life takes a pause. I remember being so surprised that life continued while I was in the hospital. I was like, I thought we all just were honoring this moment in this crisis, but apparently not. But what's one small doable step that folks can take this week to support their mental health?
This is a great question. It goes back to that self-kindness and self-compassion. I can't emphasize that enough, and maybe I sound like a broken record with this, but man, you're dealing with a lot. And can we just acknowledge that you're dealing with a lot
Right.
and not try to add? In psychology, there's a concept of clean pain versus dirty pain. And what we mean by that is clean pain is the pain that you're gonna experience because life hurts sometimes, right? Dirty pain is the pain that we heap on top of that. We keep adding to based on the way that we respond or we're fighting with our own selves or our mindset in that. And so, is there a way for you just to turn the knob down on maybe that dirty pain that you're experiencing by being self critical or by pushing yourself to the max every day and knowing likely that's not going to work? But I keep doing it because this is what I think I have to do.
Right.
Is there a way that I can be a little bit more kind to myself or maybe just a little bit more responding to myself? Like I said, I would a good friend. Is there a way I can do that for just a moment, just a little breath of fresh air?
Just got a vivid image of that dirty pain,
Right.
and I don't want that stuff dumping on me.
Oh, it's like a slop on top of everything else.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Those things that we just talked about is like, I add to this burden. Like, it's already hard enough. I don't need to keep making this harder for myself. And that's not to victim blame. So I don't mean it in that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, the self-critical, the pushing through all the time, that's exhausting.
And it's so easy to do, especially I know I've experienced where that was my go-to state of thinking. It takes time, and I continue to do affirmations and journaling to make sure that that self-criticalness doesn't creep back in, but it's definitely a work in progress.
Absolutely. Sometimes I like to, and this might be a little in the weeds here, but sometimes I like to think about having two buckets in my brain. One bucket is I call it the I come last bucket. And that's all of the thoughts, behaviors, emotions that come up that say, I come last. I'm secondary. I'm not important. Right. And then this is the I come first bucket, which is just all the actions, thoughts, and behaviors that say I need to prioritize myself, right? So when I get into a system or a day or a habit and I can look at that and say, which bucket is this fitting into right now? Am I coming last or am I coming first? And if I can just, for again, a little bit of each day, 1%, one step, put more into the bucket of I come first or I prioritize myself, then we're going to see progress a lot over time.
I love that. It's just going back to labeling it and addressing it directly, that it takes away some of the power when you just sit with those emotions. Jessica, for people who are questioning whether they think therapy could be helpful for them, are there any questions or things that they could think about whether they should go ahead and take the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in starting therapy. I mean, generally
Yeah.
speaking, to help you live a little bit better. I actually think psychologists and mental health professionals should be involved from the beginning for people with chronic illness, right? Because, like we
Real.
said, two sides of the same coin. So I think if you're questioning, that's already a sign, maybe that, like, okay,
Sure.
yeah, I could probably benefit from this. But there probably are some specific indicators too. If you're struggling with stress related symptom flares, your emotions feel like they're kind of out of control or all over the place, or the opposite, you feel like you can't tap into any of the emotional experience that are going on for you. And then another big indicator is either past trauma or medical trauma, right? So have the experiences that you have been, right, is literal death that you've faced a couple of times. Is
Yeah.
that kind of causing PTSD-like symptoms, right? So I'm thinking flashbacks, I'm thinking nightmares, things like that. Definitely seek help with that.
Want to elevate this point of around medical trauma, because trauma can feel like such a big, heavy word. I was like, I don't have any of that. I'm fine. But I've been hospitalized 3 times. I had 6 surgeries in 4 years. If you can't call that trauma, but for me, it took me a while to acknowledge that that's
Yeah.
really hard, difficult stuff to work through.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. And I think we do have a specific view of what trauma should look like too.
Yes.
But really, we've got like PTSD is kind of on one end of the spectrum. And then there's also like all the physical stuff that comes out when we don't address some of these things too, right? So goes back a little bit again to those neuroplastic symptoms or these other things where this is trauma living in my body being expressed in different ways that is not necessarily the specific diagnosis of PTSD, which we tend to see or think about first.
Right.
Diving into this, these stress trauma symptoms versus flare symptoms, how do we differentiate the two?
Are you asking about the difference between neuroplastic symptoms versus chronic illness flares or flashbacks and things like that?
The former, because thinking about someone who is overwhelmed
Right.
and doesn't have their condition under control or in remission, whatever the case may be, how would that person know, is this because I'm stressed out about my situation? So the neuroplastic symptoms, or is it my chronic illness flaring up?
Yeah,
Or is it both?
yeah, it's probably both. There's
Yeah,
no
right.
cut and dry answer there. But stress is going to like cause inflammation, right? If it's a big stress, it's going to really amp up the chronic illness itself, right? So it's going to kind of potentially, it doesn't always have to, but it can put people into flares of their condition. And then, like we said, it can also, on top of that, add symptom burden to these other things. And if someone hasn't listened to that episode from Dr. David Clark, I would recommend going back and just listening to that because I don't have time to explain all of those things here today,
Right.
but
Right.
it can
Yeah.
be additional things that people are dealing with. So I would just say if things are overwhelming and you don't know A from B at this point, don't even worry about B, right? Let's get your chronic illness and those things kind of figured out. And then if you want to work with someone who's familiar with like neuroplastic symptoms and things like that to kind of decrease some of those maybe additional things going on, great, do that. But you have to focus on the big picture and then start fine tuning it as you go.
Yeah. So much of what you're saying makes me think about how I've described stress with lupus, where I'm trying to, especially for folks who don't understand it, or don't know people who are living with it. I'll often say that stress loosens the cage, right? Like I often think about lupus as a wolf, and I was like, it helps. Like we do our best to keep that wolf in the basement in a locked cage, but when you're stressed, you're sort of opening the cage a little bit, and then he could do havoc
Yeah.
everywhere else. You know?
Absolutely. And again, I always want to go back to this is not a victim blaming situation where we're like, your stress is causing your symptoms.
Right. Right.
No, not at all. But we do want to give the proper place and acknowledgement to the physical toll that emotional stress can carry. And so I think that is the key that we want to just acknowledge. And again, we're treating the disorder, right? We're treating your chronic illness by addressing the stress and emotional toll of it all.
Jessica, you had mentioned exercise to start the engine of getting onto a better path. Are there some initial go-to tactics, exercise, and others that you recommend for people to, this is going to help no matter what?
I would say movement is a beautiful thing for our body, right? It does so much for us. It has to be done in the right way. So I'm always cautious with people with chronic illness. If you are moving your body and it's feeling good, okay, that's excellent. We want you to keep up and we don't want you to do so much of that feeling good movement that now it no longer feels good. Okay. And B, there's no expectations here. Okay. There's no, I should be performing at this level or anything like that. Or this is how it used to be or how I used to be able to exercise or anything like that. We're done with that. Okay. We deal with the here and the now. And if moving your body in a way that feels good, that's only going to, again, send messages of safety and essentially positive emotional experiences to your body. And we're trying to build back that positive partnership with your body. So that's a beautiful way to do it if done in a healthy and appropriate way. If you're at a point where movement itself is just not feasible for you, that's okay too, right? Like you're not going to be there overnight. So The only things that I would suggest are gonna be things that are gentle movement that feels good. So it could even be stretching. If that is too much, then it could just be meditation or mindfulness in those moments. So whatever it gets your body, if you can, moving in a way that feels restorative and that builds that partnership and sends messages of safety back to your body.
Now, I love that because something that I often think about is I haven't met anyone in the chronic illness community who describes their life as like, oh, I didn't have high expectations for myself. I wasn't an overachiever. I wasn't a perfectionist. It seems to, be, a lot of us who were just like, all gas, no brakes. And so the way you're reframing even something like physical fitness is so important because there's so much like I know I am often competing with myself. Like I did like kickboxing this morning.
Yeah.
And like in my mind, I see Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee's not here,
Yeah.
you know? So it's like just that constant reminder to say, like, we're not chasing perfection. We're just going to do our best today. And our best today may not be our best tomorrow or yesterday.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, your best today. What is your body giving you today and what can I do with it today? Or even in this moment, right? The moment by moment can change. So we have to honor that.
Yeah.
And at this point, too, if you've got a chronic illness, you have to honor your limits.
Yes.
You are not going to be, you may, I don't mean to put anybody in a box, but certainly until that chronic illness is better controlled, you're not going to be setting records, right? You're
Right,
not
right, right,
going to
right.
be doing these crazy, strenuous things because you're just putting more stress and more pain into that body.
I can't help but think it goes back to self compassion, honoring your body on any given moment, even with exercise, nutrition. There's a lot of pressure to eat super clean in the autoimmune space for
Yeah.
real, along with other stuff. But I appreciate you saying it's okay regardless of where you're at. You got to lean into that because it'll get better and you'll grow and do better. But having that space that it's okay with wherever we're at, I think is super important. I want to elevate that.
Yeah, I think we really have to break those narratives in our brain that
Yeah.
says, I have to perform this way or else I shouldn't do it at all. Or if I can't do it the same way I used to, it's not worth doing.
Yes.
Those kinds of stories are really what limit us and really are going to keep you from even trying at all. So, absolutely, I cannot agree more with that statement.
Jessica, is there any other topics or areas that we haven't touched on that you think is important to bring up?
The only area that I would say is maybe we've hit less on is some of those narratives, right? That self talk or those stories that we've either heard or collected from either the medical community or our friends and families about, this illness or about you, right? What are those stories? Identifying them. And if they fit and they feel good and right, yes. But if they are not helping you, right? If they're not getting you to a point that you want to be in your life, it does take some intentional work to choose to think differently, right? It almost goes back to those two buckets as well, right? I'm choosing to let go of that narrative that I'm broken. I hear that so often, which is why I'm probably harping on it, but it's this story that's like, I'm broken. I am just not worth anything anymore because I can't perform or I can't do. And to me, like, I will fight that narrative till the day I die in
No doubt.
session, like, because if you could only see your resilience from this side of the seat, you could only see how resilient you are, that story about you being broken wouldn't even be a thought. It wouldn't even come into question. And then you might feel a little bit more motivated to start doing some of these other things. So I think our mind and the narratives that we collect over those years are really important to pay attention to and see if they still fit and work for us.
And I think oftentimes we don't even realize how negative those narratives are. You saying, hearing someone else saying broken,
Right.
that is heartbreaking,
Yeah.
but I could see myself being there.
Yes. Uh-huh. Absolutely. And it's a lot of times too, we have to take a little bit of work to get out what that underlying narrative is too. Maybe some people
Right.
aren't even realizing that's how they think about themselves. But if you
Yeah.
pull out the pieces, they're like, wow, I do feel like I'm broken. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because to that point, I think so much is given, at least in this cultural moment, toward like toxic positivity, and it is significant to challenge people who are just trying to make everything seem okay when it's not. But at the same time, I think we also have a problem of people just taking that sort of negative self-talk and making it seem normal. I'm just being realistic about
Yep.
myself, and no, you're talking about yourself as if you're broken and you're not. You know?
Gosh, yes. I think that's such a key, interesting point, that toxic positivity. I try to walk this with grace and balance, right? Because I think if you do positivity and mindset work in the right way,
Right.
life changing, right? It's
For
life
sure.
changing. And if we use it as a form of emotional suppression and
Right.
avoidance,
Right.
not life changing
No,
anymore,
no, no.
right? It's the
Toxic.
opposite. Toxic, right? Exactly.
Jessica, you are a wealth of knowledge. I so appreciate you sharing your insights with us today. Can you share with our community where they can learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. You can visit my website. It's VA healthandmedicalpsychology.com. So that's VA like the state. But I am a psychologist and I have what they call a PsyPact license, which means I'm licensed to see clients in 43 states. So it doesn't have to be in Virginia. But I would check out the website if what you're seeing there and reading there resonates with you. I'm happy to kind of do a free consultation, just touch base, see if working together might be the right fit.
Awesome. Thank you. And to our community, we are launching free support groups every month. So check out the link in the description and we'll see you at the next session. Jessica, thank you again. So appreciate you being here. And thank you, Chris.
Thank you guys. It was a great conversation. Thanks for having me.
Until next time, take care. Peace.